Have you ever felt so out of place that the very air you breathe feels foreign? That's how Claire Vance felt when she stepped off the stagecoach into Redemption Gulch. She was a woman of Boston lace and literature, searching for her lost brother in a land of dust and desperation. The only man who could help her was a shadow a whisper in the mountains named Andrew Stone. They told her he was more beast than man, a loner who had turned his back on the world. But when she finally found him, his challenge wasn't about the dangers of the wild, but the darkness in a man's heart. The dust of Redemption Gulch tasted of endings. It was a fine red powder that coated everything, the sweat-stained hats of listless men, the peeling paint of the clappered storefronts, and the delicate lace trim of Claire Vance's traveling dress. For a woman who had spent her life amidst the cobblestones and quiet libraries of Boston, the town was an assault on the senses. The relentless Wyoming sun beat down the air was thick with the smells of manure-cheap whiskey and unwashed bodies, and the silence was a heavy, watchful thing, broken only by the creak of a saloon sign swinging on rusty hinges. Claire clutched her reticule, its polished silver clasp a stark anomaly in this world of worn leather and chipped wood. Inside a dog-eared photograph was all she had left of her brother Daniel. His bright academic eyes smiled out at her, full of the same adventurous spirit that had led him to this God-forsaken edge of the world. A geologist by trade and a dreamer by nature, he had written letters filled with breathless descriptions of mineral veins and untouched wilderness. Then 6 months ago, the letters had stopped. The Pinkerton agents she'd hired had traced his last known whereabouts to this very town before their own trail went cold, their final report filled with vague warnings about a local tyrant and the unforgiving landscape. Her first stop was the sheriff's office. The man behind the desk, Sheriff Brown, was a study in weary resignation. His face was a road map of creases, and his tin star was tarnished. He listened to her story with a practiced patience, his gaze occasionally drifting to the window as if expecting trouble to ride in on the next gust of wind. "Daniel Vance?" he murmured, rubbing his jaw. "Yes, ma'am. I remember him. A quiet fellow. Kept to himself, always scribbling in a little leather book. He was heading up into the Blacktooth Mountains, like most folks who come through here with a fever for gold." Was he alone? Claire pressed her voice, clear and precise, a stark contrast to the sheriff's slow drawl. "He was. Hired a mule-bought supplies. Last I saw him, he was talking about prospecting near the Crimson River." The sheriff leaned forward, his voice dropping. "That's rough country, Miss Vance. Dangerous country. Not just the cliffs and the cougars. There are other dangers." Before Claire could ask him to elaborate, the bat-wing doors of the office swung open, and a shadow fell across the room. A man stood framed in the doorway, broad-shouldered and impeccably dressed in a black frock coat and a crisp bowler hat. His face was handsome in a severe way, with a neatly trimmed mustache and eyes as cold and gray as river stones. The ambient noise of the street seemed to die down in his presence. "Sheriff," the man said, his voice a low, cultured rumble that held an unmistakable note of command. He nodded curtly at Claire. "Ma'am." Sheriff Brown straightened in his chair, a flicker of something discomfort or perhaps fear in his eyes. "Mr. Blackwood." "What can I do for you?" "Just collecting my mail, Sheriff, and ensuring the peace is kept." Jacob Blackwood's gaze swept over Claire, a cool, appraising look that made her feel like a specimen under glass. "We have a visitor, I see. It's not often we're graced with such refined company. This is Miss Claire Vance Brown supplied. She's looking for her brother Daniel." A flicker of recognition crossed Blackwood's face so quick Claire might have imagined it. Ah, the geologist. A tragedy. The mountains have a cruel way of claiming the unwary. He offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "My condolences, Miss Vance. I own the Blackwood Cattle and Mining Company. My business interests cover most of this territory. If any of my men hear anything, I will be sure to let the sheriff know." It was a dismissal, polite and final. He collected a stack of letters from a side table and departed the town's oppressive silence, returning in his wake. "Who is he?" Claire asked, her unease growing. "Jacob Blackwood, the sheriff," said, sighing as he watched the man cross the street. "He more or less is Redemption Gulch. Owns the bank, the largest ranch, the mining rights to half the county. You'd do well to stay clear of his affairs." Claire's intuition, a faculty she had always trusted, screamed that Blackwood and her brother's disappearance were connected. The dismissive look, the sheriff's fear, it was a puzzle, and she was missing a crucial piece. "The report I received mentioned a man," she said, changing tactics. "A trapper, a mountain man. The last person to have seen my brother alive. His name was Stone, Andrew Stone." Sheriff Brown's expression soured. "Jacob Stone. Folks around here just call him Stone. He's not a man you go looking for, ma'am. He keeps to the high country. Doesn't take kindly to company, especially from folks like you." The unspoken words from back east hung in the air. "He's more wild than the beasts he traps. If he was the last to see your brother, it might not be a good sign." Nevertheless, Claire said, her resolve hardening into a diamond point, "I must find him. He is my only lead. Where can I hire a guide?" The sheriff shook his head slowly. "No guide worth his salt will take you into Stone's territory, and none would dare ask him for a favor. If you want to talk to Andrew Stone, you'll have to find him yourself. There's a trading post a day's ride north on the edge of the foothills, run by a woman named Martha. Stone comes down from the peaks once a month for supplies. If you're lucky, or maybe unlucky, you might find him there." Ignoring the sheriff's ominous tone, Claire thanked him and walked back out into the blistering sun. The town felt smaller now, its dusty street a stage, and she had just met the villain. Jacob Blackwood was a predator, she was certain of it. And Andrew Stone, the reclusive mountain man, was the only one who might hold the key. Her search for her brother had just become a journey into the heart of a darkness she was only beginning to comprehend. She would find this man, this Stone, and she would get her answers no matter how wild he was. The ride to Martha's trading post was a lesson in humility. The rented mare was stubborn, the saddle was an instrument of torture, and the landscape was a vast indifferent canvas of rock and sagebrush. Claire, accustomed to carriage rides and paved streets, felt every jarring step, every mile that took her further from civilization and deeper into the maw of the wilderness. By the time the low, sturdy shape of the trading post appeared like a mirage in the heat haze, she was coated in dust. Her muscles ached, and her tailored riding habit was a ruin. Martha was a woman carved from the same timber as the post she ran. Her face was weathered, her hands were calloused, and her eyes held a shrewd, knowing intelligence. She took one look at Claire's exhausted state and gestured her inside with a grunt. "Looking for someone? Or just lost Martha?" asked, pouring a dipper of cool water into a tin cup. "I'm looking for a man," Claire said, drinking gratefully. "Andrew Stone." Martha paused the dipper, hovering over the bucket. She set it down with a deliberate thud. Why, it wasn't a question of curiosity, but a demand. "He may have information about my brother Daniel Vance. I was told he was the last person to see him." The older woman studied Claire's face, her gaze lingering on the fine bone structure and the determined set of her jaw. "The sheriff sent you." It was a statement, not a question. He should have known better. Stone ain't a man for polite conversation. He's a storm girl. You don't ask a storm for answers, you just pray it passes you by. "I am not afraid of a storm," Claire replied, her voice steady despite her weariness. "Is he here?" Martha grunted again, a sound that could have meant anything, and jerked her head toward the back of the post. "He's out back checking his traps. Due in for supplies any minute. But don't say I didn't warn you." Claire squared her shoulders, smoothed the wrinkles from her jacket as best she could, and walked through the dim, cluttered trading post. The air smelled of tanned leather coffee beans and something else, something musky and wild. She pushed open the heavy wooden door at the back and stepped into the sharp evening light. He was standing by a creek washing his hands. He was taller than she'd expected, with a breadth of shoulder that stretched the fabric of his buckskin shirt. His dark hair was long and unruly, tied back with a leather cord, and a thick, untrimmed beard covered the lower half of his face. When he heard the door open, he didn't turn immediately. He finished rinsing his hands, his movements slow and deliberate, before drying them on his leather breeches. Only then did he face her. His eyes were the most startling thing about him. They were a pale, piercing blue, the color of a winter sky, and they seemed to miss nothing. They took in her expensive, ruined clothes, her determined posture, and the faint tremor in her hands she couldn't quite conceal. "You're a long way from home, little bird," he said. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble, like stones shifting in a riverbed. Claire's carefully prepared speech evaporated. This was not just a rugged man. He was a force of nature exuding an aura of primal competence that was both intimidating and strangely compelling. "My name is Claire Vance." She managed lifting her chin. "I need to speak with you. I'm listening," he said, though his posture remained closed off his arms, crossed over his powerful chest. "I'm searching for my brother Daniel Vance. I believe you knew him." Andrew Stone's expression didn't change, but a shudder seemed to fall behind his eyes. "The name's familiar. He went into the Blacktooth Mountains 6 months ago and never returned. I was told you were the last person to see him alive." Her voice trembled slightly on the last few words. "I need to know what happened to him. I need you to guide me. Take me to the last place you saw him." He let out a short, harsh laugh that held no humor. "Guide you, lady? You wouldn't last a day up there. The mountains don't care about your fancy clothes or your polite words. They'll chew you up and spit you out. I am stronger than I look," she countered, stung by his dismissiveness. "And I will pay you whatever you ask." He took a step closer, and Claire had to fight the instinct to retreat. He smelled of pine wood smoke and cold, clean air. He loomed over her, a mountain of a man casting a long shadow in the fading light. A lantern hung from a post nearby, and Martha had just lit it, its warm yellow glow illuminating the tense space between them. He leaned in his voice, dropping to a low, intimate growl. His piercing eyes locked onto hers, challenging and dissecting her all at once. "It ain't about money, little bird. It's about survival. Up there, I'm the only law, the only hope you'd have. Everything you are, your books, your manners, your life back east, it's all dead weight. Out here, you'd have to trust me. Rely on me for every meal, every step, every breath. You'd have to handle the cold, the hunger, the fear, and you'd have to handle me." He paused, a ghost of a smirk playing on his lips beneath the thick beard. "Think you can handle me?" The mountain man teased beneath the lantern light. The question hung in the air, a raw, audacious challenge. He was testing her, trying to scare her away, to send her scurrying back to the safety of her world. But in his eyes beneath the hard, cynical surface, she saw something else, a flicker of Daniel's adventurous spirit, a deep and abiding connection to the wilderness that her brother had so admired. This man was the wilderness personified. Claire met his gaze without flinching, her own fear solidifying into something new, something hard and unyielding. "Yes," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I can." A flicker of surprise, and perhaps a grudging respect crossed his face. He stared at her for a long moment, the silence stretching until it was taut as a bowstring. "Be ready at sunrise," he grunted, turning his back on her. "And for God's sake, get some proper boots." The mountains were a beautiful, brutal teacher. The first 2 days of their journey stripped away every layer of Claire's Boston refinement. Her hands, accustomed to the smooth vellum of books, were now raw and blistered from the mule's lead rope. Her muscles screamed in protest against the relentless climb, and the thin, high-altitude air burned in her lungs. Andrew Stone set a punishing pace, communicating mostly in grunts and curt commands. "Watch your footing here, drink water. Don't touch that plant." He moved through the unforgiving terrain with the fluid grace of an animal born to it. He was utterly self-sufficient, a man who seemed to draw strength directly from the rock and timber around him. He showed her how to find north using the sun, how to identify edible berries, how to listen to the forest's subtle language of snapped twigs and bird calls that signaled the presence of predators. He was a demanding, impatient teacher, but a thorough one. Their conversations were sparse-clipped exchanges by the nightly campfire. He would sit across the flames from her, sharpening his knife on a whetstone, his pale eyes watching her from the shadows. She tried to ask about Daniel, but he would deflect his answers short and non-committal. He was a city man. Didn't understand the rules up here. The turning point came on the third night. A sudden, violent thunderstorm rolled in from the peaks, turning the dry creek bed they were following into a raging torrent. Rain fell in blinding sheets, and lightning split the sky, illuminating the stark landscape in terrifying monochrome flashes. Jacob reacted with instinctual speed, grabbing Claire in their packs and half dragging her up a steep embankment to the relative shelter of a rocky overhang. They huddled together in the dark, soaked and shivering, the roar of the flash flood echoing in the narrow canyon below. For the first time, Claire saw a crack in his formidable armor. There was a grim tension in his jaw, a focused alertness in his eyes that spoke not of fear, but of profound respect for the power of the nature he called home. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper over the storm. He just nodded, his gaze fixed on the churning water. As the storm began to pass, leaving behind a world washed clean and smelling of wet earth and ozone, a fragile truce settled between them. He built a small, smokeless fire in the back of the overhang and handed her a piece of jerky. "You're tougher than you look, Boston." He said the words, offered as a rare concession. "My name is Claire," she corrected softly. He looked at her, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "Claire," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. He finally seemed to see her not as an inconvenient piece of baggage, but as a person. Sensing the shift, she asked again, her voice gentle. "Andrew, please, tell me about my brother." He was silent for a long time, poking at the fire with a stick. When he finally spoke, the gravelly rumble of his voice was subdued, tinged with a sorrow he couldn't quite conceal. "I liked him," he began. "He was different. Not like the others who come looking for gold with greed burning in their eyes. Daniel was curious. He loved the rocks, the way the mountains were formed. He'd talk for hours about strata and sediment things I didn't understand. But his passion was real." Jacob looked up, his gaze meeting hers across the flames. He was a good man, but he was naive. He trusted the wrong people. What people? Claire prompted, her heart beginning to pound. He wasn't just looking for gold, Claire. Not at the end. The twist landed with the weight of a physical blow. He was a geologist, remember? He found something else. Something valuable, but not in the way you think. Jacob stood and walked to the mouth of their shelter, staring out at the moonlit, rain-slicked canyon. Jacob Blackwood has been buying up homesteads downriver for pennies on the dollar, claiming the land is drying up. The farmers are going broke, selling out to him, and moving on. What does that have to do with Daniel? Daniel found the reason why the land is drying up. Jacob set his voice hard. He followed the Crimson River to its source, high in these mountains. He found a dam, an illegal one, cleverly hidden in a box canyon on Blackwood's property. It's diverting a huge portion of the river's flow to Blackwood's mining operations and his own prime ranch land, while everyone downstream withers on the vine. Claire felt a chill that had nothing to do with her damp clothes. He was stealing their water. More than that. Your brother was smart. He took mineral assays, drew maps. He found out Blackwood's land claims were fraudulent. He'd filed claims for silver and copper on land he knew was barren, all as a pretense to control the water rights. Daniel had the proof in his journal, in his rock samples, to ruin Blackwood completely, to send him to prison. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Blackwood's cold smile, Sheriff Brown's fear, the Pinkertons' sudden dead end. What happened to him, Andrew? She whispered, dread coiling in her stomach. Jacob turned to face her, his expression grim. I warned him. I told him to take his findings to the federal marshals in Cheyenne, not to the local law. I told him Blackwood was a snake. But Daniel was an idealist. He believed in justice. He said he was going back to Redemption Gulch to confront Blackwood, to present his evidence to Sheriff Brown. He took a deep breath. That was the last time I ever saw him. He walked down out of these mountains carrying that leather journal full of truth, and he never walked out of Redemption Gulch. The unspoken conclusion hung between them as stark and terrible as the lightning that had just ripped the sky apart. Her brother hadn't gotten lost in the mountains. He had been silenced by the man who owned the town. Returning to Redemption Gulch was like walking back into a cage. The knowledge of Blackwood's treachery had transformed the dusty town from a place of simple hardship into a landscape of veiled threats. Every friendly nod from a townsperson felt like a potential betrayal. Every shadow seemed to hold a spy. Claire, no longer the naive woman from Boston, saw the town for what it was, a fiefdom ruled by a tyrant. They took a room at the boarding house, Jacob insisting he stay in the room adjacent to hers. He was no longer just her guide. He was her protector, a silent, watchful presence who seemed to sense danger before it appeared. "We need the journal," Claire stated, her voice low and determined as they sat in her small, stuffy room. "If it still exists, it will be with his belongings. The sheriff said he was staying here at this boarding house before he left for the mountains." The proprietor, a thin, nervous woman named Mrs. Gable, wrung her hands when Claire inquired about her brother's possessions. "Oh, dearie, Mr. Blackwood's man Caleb, he came by months ago. Said he was settling Mr. Vance's affairs. He paid the bill and took everything." Claire's heart sank. "Everything? A trunk, a bag, just a small satchel," Mrs. Gable whispered, darting a look toward the street. "But he missed something. It had rolled under the bed. I kept it. Didn't seem right to just throw it out." She scurried away and returned with a small leather-bound book. It was Daniel's field journal. Claire's hands trembled as she took it. It was real. It was here. She and Jacob spent the next hour poring over the pages. Daniel's neat scientific script detailed everything Jacob had told her and more. There were precise hand-drawn maps of the illegal dam geological surveys proving Blackwood's claims were fraudulent, and damningly, a final entry met with Jacob Blackwood to discuss my findings. He seemed exceptionally interested, but not in the way I expected. There is a coldness in him. I will present this to Sheriff Brown tomorrow. Justice must be done. They had the proof. But possessing it in Redemption Gulch was like holding a lit stick of dynamite. Blackwood knows we're here, and he knows why Jacob set his gaze fixed on the street below. He let you find me. He let you come back. He's waiting to see what you have. His words proved prophetic. That evening, as Claire sat by her window, she saw two men emerge from the saloon across the street. One was a hulking brute with a scarred face she recognized as Caleb, the man Mrs. Gable had mentioned. They didn't even try to be subtle. They stood in the shadows of the opposite building, watching her window, their intent as clear as the pistols on their hips. The psychological warfare began. A dead rattlesnake was left on her doorstep the next morning. Whispers followed her when she went to the general store. The friendly faces of the townsfolk had been replaced by shuttered, fearful expressions. They were too terrified of Blackwood to offer her any aid. Claire decided to confront the one man who was supposed to represent the law. She found Sheriff Brown polishing a shotgun, his movements slow and methodical. "I have my brother's journal. Sheriff," she said, placing the book on his desk. "It contains proof, that Jacob Blackwood has been illegally diverting the Crimson River and has filed fraudulent mining claims. It's also the reason he had my brother murdered. Brown didn't look at the journal. He continued his polishing his knuckles white. That's a heavy accusation, Miss Vance. An accusation you can't prove. The proof is in the book, she insisted, her frustration boiling over. Are you going to do your job? Or are you on his payroll like everyone else in this town? The sheriff finally stopped setting the shotgun down with a quiet click. He looked up at her, and the weariness in his eyes seemed profound, a bone-deep exhaustion that went beyond a simple lack of sleep. You think you're the first person to come up against Jacob Blackwood. You think your brother was the first good man to disappear after asking the wrong questions. He stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. This town is a spider web, Miss Vance. And Blackwood is the spider. You can't just go tearing at the strands. You'll only get yourself tangled, and then you'll get eaten. Go home. Take what you have to the marshals in Cheyenne. You can't win this fight here. It was a warning, but it felt like a confession of his own impotence. Claire snatched the journal from his desk, her faith in the law, at least in this town, utterly shattered. If you won't help me, I'll find someone who will, she said, her voice shaking with rage. As she stormed out of the office, she didn't see the flicker of something else in Sheriff Brown's eyes as he watched her go. Not fear, not corruption, but a deep calculating patience, like a man playing a long and dangerous game of chess, waiting for his opponent to make a single fatal mistake. That night, Blackwood's shadow drew closer. Caleb and his partner tried to force their way into her room. The only thing that stopped them was the sudden appearance of Andrew Stone in the hallway, holding a Bowie knife the size of a man's forearm. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, a silent, lethal promise of violence. The two thugs, after a tense standoff, retreated into the darkness. He won't stop. Jacob set his voice, a low growl, as he checked the lock on her door. He knows we have the journal. We can't stay here. He's cornered us. No. Claire said, a new cold resolve settling over her. She looked from the journal to the window, where the jagged peaks of the Blacktooth Mountains were silhouetted against the starry sky. He thinks he's cornered us. The journal isn't enough. They'll call it the ravings of a dead man. We need more. We need to see that dam for ourselves. We need photographs. We need proof so undeniable that even a coward like Sheriff Brown can't ignore it. Jacob looked at her, a flicker of admiration in his pale eyes. The little bird from Boston was gone. In her place was a woman forged in grief and anger, a woman who was done running. It's an ambush waiting to happen, he warned. Then we'll be ready for it, she replied. You're the guide, Mr. Stone. Guide me. The journey back into the Blacktooth Mountains was different. The first time Claire had been a passenger, a fragile outsider struggling to keep up. Now she moved with a grim purpose. She had traded her ruined riding habit for sturdy canvas trousers and a flannel shirt bought from Martha's Post. She carried a rifle, one Jacob had insisted she learn to load and fire, and its weight on her back was a constant solid reminder of their mission. They traveled with a heightened sense of caution, avoiding the main trails Jacob had used before. He led them through dense thickets and along precarious goat-like paths, his eyes constantly scanning the ridge lines, his ears attuned to every unnatural sound. They were no longer just traveling through the wilderness. They were moving through enemy territory. "Blackwood will know we've gone," Jacob said, as they made a cold camp on the second night forgoing a fire. "He'll have his men sweeping the mountains for us. Caleb knows this country too. Not like I do, but well enough." "We have the advantage," Claire countered, checking the action on her rifle. Daniel had taught her the basics of photography for her own naturalist hobby, and she clutched the heavy box-like camera they'd retrieved from her trunk. "They don't know exactly where we're going. They know where the dam is." Jacob grunted. "They'll be waiting." He was right. They found the dam on the fourth day. It was cleverly concealed in a narrow box canyon, a crude but effective structure of timber and rock that diverted a significant flow of the Crimson River into a man-made channel. It was precisely where Daniel's map had indicated it would be. The canyon had only one way in and one way out. It was a perfect trap. Jacob held up a hand, stopping them at the mouth of the canyon. He crouched silent as a wolf, his eyes scanning the rocky walls that rose steeply on either side. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. The air was still too still. Up there, Jacob whispered his voice, a bare breath of sound nodding toward a rocky outcrop overlooking the path. 2 of them. Rifles. Before Claire could process the information, the trap was sprung. The sharp crack of a rifle shot echoed through the canyon, and a chip of rock exploded from the boulder beside her head. A second shot kicked up dust at Jacob's feet. "Move!" he roared, shoving her behind a cluster of massive rocks. Gunfire erupted from both sides of the canyon. They were pinned down, outnumbered. Caleb's voice boomed from above. "Give it up. Stone Blackwood just wants the book and the girl. You can walk away." "Not today. Caleb," Jacob yelled back, pushing his own rifle through a gap in the rocks and firing a single calculated shot. A cry of pain from above told him it had found its mark. The next few minutes were a terrifying chaos of noise and violence. Bullets whined and ricocheted off the rocks around them. Jacob was a whirlwind of deadly efficiency, firing sparingly, making every shot count, calling out positions. Left ridge, pine tree. Claire, huddled behind the rock, felt a wave of paralyzing fear. This was real. Men were trying to kill them. Then she thought of Daniel, of his idealism and his courage, murdered for the truth she now held. The fear receded, replaced by a cold, sharp fury. She was not a victim. She was a participant. She crawled to a new position, resting her rifle on a rock as Jacob had taught her. She saw a muzzle flash from a nest of boulders across the canyon. Her hands shaking, she took a breath, aimed, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, the report deafeningly loud. She didn't know if she hit anything, but the firing from that position stopped. The tide of the battle turned when Jacob, under the cover of her fire, did the unthinkable. He broke from their cover and scrambled up the near vertical canyon wall, moving with an impossible speed and agility. He was the mountain man in his element, a hunter turning the tables on his pursuers. There were shouts of alarm from above, followed by 2 quick pistol shots, and then a final awful silence. When Jacob reappeared at the top of the ridge, the ambush was over. 2 of Blackwood's men were dead. Caleb and another had fled. The aftermath was quiet and grim. Jacob had a long, bloody gash on his forearm, where a bullet had grazed him. As the adrenaline faded, the reality of what they had done settled in. Claire found herself shaking uncontrollably, not from fear, but from the shock of her own actions. Jacob slid down the rock face and came to her. He took the rifle from her trembling hands. "You did good, Claire." He set his voice quiet. That night they took shelter in a small, dry cave higher up the mountain. Claire insisted on tending to his wound, her hands surprisingly steady as she cleaned and bandaged the gash with strips of cloth torn from her petticoat. The forced intimacy of the act, the close proximity in the enclosed space, broke down the last of the walls between them. She saw the scars crisscrossing his back, and arms' old wounds from fights with men and beasts alike. She saw the weariness in his eyes, the loneliness of a man who had chosen exile. He saw the iron will beneath her refined exterior, the grief that drove her, and the surprising resilience she had discovered within herself. "Why do you do this?" she asked softly, tying off the bandage. "Why are you helping me? This isn't your fight." Jacob looked at his bandaged arm, then at her face, illuminated by the soft glow of their small lantern. "Your brother was my friend," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "He was the first man in 10 years who looked at me and saw a person, not a ghost or a monster. He came up here and talked about books and rocks and reminded me of a world I'd forgotten." He reached out his calloused hand, gently touching her cheek. "And this is my fight. Blackwood's poison is seeping into my mountains. He killed my friend. That makes it my fight." The space between them crackled with an unspoken energy. The shared danger, the forced proximity, the raw vulnerability of the moment it all converged. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. The kiss was not gentle. It was rough, desperate, and deeply human. It was a clash of two worlds, her structured civilization and his untamed wilderness, finding a common ground in grief, defiance, and a spark of something fierce and undeniable. In the heart of the unforgiving mountains, amidst the shadow of death, they were no longer a client and a guide. They were allies, bound by a shared cause and a connection forged in gunfire and sealed in a silent cave. They returned to Redemption Gulch not as fugitives, but as avengers. They didn't sneak into town under the cover of darkness. They rode down the center of the main street at high noon, the dust rising around their horses' hooves. Andrew, with his arm in a sling, looked every bit the formidable mountain man, his pale eyes sweeping the street with cold authority. Claire, astride her horse, carried Daniel's journal, the camera with its precious photographic plate, and a new, unshakable resolve. She was no longer a visitor. She was a reckoning. The town seemed to hold its breath as they dismounted in front of the saloon, Blackwood's unofficial headquarters. People stopped in the street, peering from windows and doorways, a current of nervous energy passing through the populace. Jacob Blackwood himself emerged from the saloon, followed by the hulking, bandaged figure of Caleb. Blackwood's polished facade was still in place, but a dangerous glint shone in his cold eyes. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice smooth as oiled steel, "I see you've returned from your excursion, and you've brought your pet savage with you. I trust you found the mountain air invigorating. I found the truth. Mr. Blackwood." Claire said, her voice ringing out in the silence clear and strong. She dismounted, standing her ground in the dusty street. I found the dam you built to steal water from the homesteaders downstream. And I found the proof that you murdered my brother, Daniel Vance, to hide your crimes. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Accusing Jacob Blackwood openly in the middle of town was unthinkable. Blackwood let out a short, condescending laugh. My dear woman, grief has clearly addled your senses. You have no proof, only the wild fantasies of a mountain hermit and the scribbles of a dead man. Oh, but I do have proof, Claire retorted. She held up the journal. I have my brother's detailed records of your fraudulent claims. Then she unstrapped the heavy camera from her saddle. And I have this, a photograph, a perfect, undeniable image of your illegal dam taken 2 days ago. An image that will send you to federal prison. Blackwood's smile faltered. The camera was an unexpected complication. Technology from the East, a tool of irrefutable fact in a world governed by force and influence. His eyes narrowed and he gave a subtle nod to Caleb. That is a private matter on private land, Blackwood hissed. You are trespassing, and you are slandering my good name. Caleb relieved the lady of that equipment. Caleb and 2 other thugs started forward, their hands moving toward their guns. The townsfolk scattered, diving for cover. This was it, the moment violence would reclaim the narrative. But then a new voice cut through the tension. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Caleb. Sheriff Brown stepped out from his office, holding the shotgun he had been polishing days earlier. It was no longer an object of idle maintenance. It was leveled directly at Caleb's chest. His face was not weary anymore. It was hard determined, the face of a lawman who had finally chosen his moment. Blackwood stared at him in disbelief. Brown, have you lost your mind? Stand down. No, Jacob Brown, said his voice, calm and steady. I'm done standing down. He looked at the assembled townsfolk who were peeking out from their hiding places. For years, I've watched you squeeze this town, threaten good people, and get away with murder. I was one man. I had no evidence that would stick. I was just waiting for someone brave enough to light the fuse. Miss Vance here, she lit it. It was the most stunning twist of all. The sheriff's cowardice had been a mask, his inaction a long, patient strategy. He had been biding his time, gathering his own whispers and suspicions, waiting for a catalyst, for a piece of tangible proof he could use to rally the people. Andrew Stone Brown called out, not taking his eyes off Blackwood's men. I'm formally deputizing you. You too, Mr. Abernathy. He nodded to the blacksmith, who was watching with wide eyes. Mr. Gable, you have a rifle. Get it. A moment of hesitation, and then a slow shift in the town's allegiance. The blacksmith disappeared into his shop and emerged with a heavy hammer. Others began to step forward, their fear finally being eclipsed by a shared simmering anger. They had found a leader, not just in the sheriff, but in the determined woman from Boston who had refused to be intimidated. Blackwood looked around his face, a mask of fury. His iron grip on Redemption Gulch was slipping through his fingers, right here in the light of day. His power had always been rooted in the illusion of being untouchable. Now that illusion was shattering. You're all fools. He snarled, his composure finally breaking. He drew a concealed derringer from his coat pocket. This town is mine. He wasn't aiming for the sheriff or for Jacob. He was aiming for Claire, the source of his undoing. The world seemed to slow down in the instant Jacob Blackwood drew his pistol. The flicker of silver, the desperate rage in his eyes, the collective intake of breath from the townsfolk, it all happened in a heartbeat. But Andrew Stone moved faster. He threw himself in front of Claire, a human shield of buckskin and raw muscle. The Derringer fired with a pop that was shockingly small in the vast open street. Jacob grunted, stumbling back as the bullet struck him high in the shoulder, spinning him around. The shot broke the spell. Sheriff Brown's shotgun roared the blast, tearing into the saloon's facade just above Blackwood's head, sending splinters of wood flying. Caleb and his men drew their weapons, and the main street of Redemption Gulch erupted into a full-blown gunfight. It was not the elegant choreographed violence of a dime novel. It was clumsy, chaotic, and terrifying. Men yelled and cursed, pistols bucked, and bullets whizzed through the air with deadly intent. But the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. It was no longer just Blackwood's hired guns against a lone mountain man. It was Blackwood against the town he had oppressed for so long. The blacksmith, Mr. Abernathy, used his brawn to overturn a water trough, creating a barricade for the others. Martha, the trading post owner, appeared in an upper window, with an old buffalo rifle firing with a steady, practiced hand. Claire, her heart pounding with terror, for Jacob dragged him behind the cover of the trough. The wound was bloody, but it wasn't fatal. "Stay down," she yelled over the din. "I'm fine," he growled, already trying to draw his own pistol with his good hand. His eyes weren't on his own wound. They were on her, ensuring she was safe. The fight was short and brutal. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, Blackwood's men lost their nerve. One threw down his gun and surrendered. Another was shot by Sheriff Brown, and Caleb, after a brief, furious exchange with Jacob, was felled by a bullet from the mountain man's pistol. That left only Blackwood. He stood alone in front of his saloon, his fine coat now covered in dust, his face a mask of disbelief. His empire had crumbled in less than 5 minutes. He saw Brown and the deputized townsmen advancing on him. He saw Jacob wounded, but resolute, standing by Claire's side. He saw a town that was no longer his. In a final pathetic act of defiance, he turned and ran back into the saloon. "He's not getting away," Brown said, reloading his shotgun. But Jacob held up a hand. "Let me." He walked across the street, his wounded arm held tight against his body, and stepped through the swinging doors of the saloon. Claire, followed by Brown, was right behind him. They found Blackwood behind the bar, fumbling to reload his Derringer. He looked up, his eyes wild with panic. "It's over, Jacob." Jacob said, his voice low and steady. He didn't raise his pistol. Hugh Blackwood spat his gaze full of venom, the savage from the hills. "And you." He glared at Claire, the righteous little prig from the east. "You've ruined everything." "You ruined yourself," Claire said, her voice steady. "Tell me what you did to my brother." Blackwood laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Your brother was a fool, an idealist. He brought his little book to me, first thinking I'd be impressed by his detective work. He wanted to give me a chance to do the right thing. Can you imagine?" He shook his head in mock pity. "I told him I'd consider his proposal. I walked him down to the river to talk. His body is buried out past the old cottonwoods. No one will ever find it. It was a confession, cruel and final. The last sliver of hope Claire had held for Daniel's survival was extinguished. But in its place was a strange, sad peace. She knew. The mystery was solved. Sheriff Brown stepped forward, his shotgun leveled. "Jacob Blackwood, you're under arrest for the murder of Daniel Vance and a list of other crimes so long it'll take the circuit judge a month to read them." Blackwood, cornered and defeated, made one last desperate move, lunging for a bottle on the bar to use as a weapon. Jacob was faster, his good hand striking like a snake and sending Blackwood sprawling to the floor. The fight was finally truly over. In the weeks that followed, Redemption Gulch began to heal. With Blackwood imprisoned and awaiting the federal marshal, the dam was dismantled by the very homesteaders he had sought to ruin. The water of the Crimson River once again flowed freely. Claire, using Daniel's journal, worked with a lawyer from Cheyenne to help the farmers restore their legal claims. She found a new purpose here, honoring her brother's legacy, not just by seeking justice for his death, but by completing his work. She had planned to return to Boston, but the thought of its quiet, orderly streets now felt alien. She had been changed by the dust, the mountains, and the violence. She had discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. One evening, she found Jacob sitting on the porch of the boarding house, staring up at the peaks of the Blacktooth Mountains, now silhouetted by the sunset. His arm was healing, and he was restless, unaccustomed to the confines of the town. "Will you be heading back up there soon?" she asked softly. He looked at her, his pale eyes searching her face. "I was. That was the plan." And now, he was quiet for a moment, then gave a small, uncharacteristic smile. "Seems my plans have changed. The mountains will always be there. But what I'm looking for might be right here." He reached out, taking her hand, his calloused fingers lacing through hers. "This town found its redemption. And I think maybe I have too." Claire looked from his face to the rugged mountains and then to the small, recovering town around them. She had come west, seeking a ghost, and found a home. She had sought answers and found a future she never could have imagined, a future with the wild, formidable mountain man who had challenged her, saved her, and ultimately shown her who she was truly meant to be. In the wild, untamed heart of the West, a woman of lace found her steel, and a man of stone found his heart. Claire and Andrew's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest challenges we face aren't the towering mountains or the ruthless villains, but the limits we place on ourselves. They fought for justice, found an unexpected love, and proved that even in a place called Redemption Gulch, true redemption is something you have to claim for yourself. What did you think of Claire's incredible transformation? Could you have been as brave as she was? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If their story of courage and resilience touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who loves a dramatic tale, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Your support means the world and helps us bring these incredible sagas to life. Thank you for listening.